1 Timothy chapter 3. As we're going through the qualifications of the office of a bishop, we got to this point last week, and I wanted to make sure that we got some things taken care of before we move on with this. But we got up into verse 3 last week, and we dealt with some of the issues in this verse. So what I want to do is let's read 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 3 through 7, and then we'll get going. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 3, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride he fall in the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Father, we want to thank you for the opportunity that we have to study your word, that it's been preserved throughout the years and ages, that we can have it, we can handle it, we can study it, and we can apply the information to our lives. And as we take a look at these qualifications, may we look at ourselves and judge whether or not, as an adult, whether or not that these are things that we can partake in, that we might be to the praise and honor and glory of your grace. And it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Now, as I said, we're in chapter 3, verse 3. Last week we talked about the issue of not given to wine. Obviously, there's a couple different things there. One, wine itself. Secondly, we talked about in Ephesians chapter 5, Paul brings up the issue of be not drunk with wine, whereas in excess, but be filled with the Spirit. And so we talked about the issue of don't get into the religious system. And one of the things that's going to happen with getting into the religious system is this issue of the filthy lucre. And that's where we left off the last time. But in verse 3, he says, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre. One of the things we talked about the last time is the issue of lucre. Filthy lucre is receiving the money based on the religious context, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that this morning. The issue of lucre is the issue of being lucrative, right? Being profitable and having some sort of profit with that. And what we talked about is there's nothing wrong with money. There's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with giving money. There's nothing wrong with taking in money and things like that. The issue is what's the purpose behind it, right? And what is it that's driving the issue? So what I want us to do is let's go over to Jude. Go over to Jude, verse 11. All right, so Jude, verse 11. And some things that I want us to be able to see and go and take a look at. First of all, notice here in Jude, verse 11. Jude, verse 11. Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain. Now, I want to pause there for a second. Of course, where are we in the context of the Bible here is we're over in the tribulation period of time. Hebrews to Revelation is dealing with the tribulation period, and we understand where this is. However, are there people that have gone in the way of Cain still today? And of course, we say yes, because that's the whole issue of religious apostasy. We saw that showed up in Genesis chapter 4 this morning, right, when we were going through that. We saw that issue of how they go about that. But notice this second one, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward. Now, that second one is really the issue that we're going to take a look at. But then there's that third one, and perished in the gainsaying of Kor. So there's three different issues that's taking place there. One is that religious system. The second is notice where he says, and ran greedily. Not just the fact that, I'm walking along and, oh, hey, here's this opportunity, but this is, I see an opportunity and I'm going to run towards it because I know that I'm going to gain something from that, right? And that's what we're going to be able to see here. So you have, woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, dealing with that religious system. Secondly, they're going after this. They ran greedily after the error of Balaam. So we're going to take a look at that error of Balaam. And the third one is they perished in the gainsaying of Kor. Now, years ago, we talked about that issue of Kor. What was the issue with Kor was he was denying the authority that God gave to Moses. Now, Years ago, we did a study called Don't Be the Core of the Body of Christ. And the idea there is, if you're a member of the church of the body of Christ, don't deny the authority that God gave to Paul, right? So just as Core denied the authority that God gave to Moses, we have people today, we were talking about that earlier, a lot of folks, they'll say, well, Paul shouldn't be in the Bible. That, there's a whole bunch of people out there that say Paul's scriptures should not be in the Bible because they're so contrary to everything else. And you're like, well, praise the Lord that you see the fact that they're contrary to everything else. But don't get rid of it. In fact, find out why it's there. And the other issues we talked about earlier is a lot of times people think, well, that's just what man wrote down. That's man's opinions, what he thinks about it. When in fact, they misunderstand that the scriptures is actually written by God and he used man to write them down. Right? It's not man's opinions. These are God's facts. This is God's truth that he's written down for us to know. And so then there's a whole other thing that goes along with that as well. But when we look at this, there's three issues. They've gone in the way of Cain. They ran greedily after the heir of Balaam. Notice, not just that they've ran greedily after the heir of Balaam, but why did they do it? For reward. The purpose of it is, that's the issue of the greedy lucre. The filthy lucre, being greedy of that and going after it because they know they're going to make money. Now, again, I always bring stuff up about what I grew up in, and I didn't realize at the time that all the stuff that I was being taught as a young man was that right there. It was people that ran greedily after the heir of Balaam for reward. They wanted to gain something from it. So that's the issue that I want us to be able to see. Now, let's go back to Numbers. And I want you to see something back there. Numbers chapter 22. All right. Numbers chapter 22. Numbers chapter 22, and there's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot in here that we're going to be able to deal with. But Numbers chapter 22, we're not going to read all the way through this, but I want us to notice something here real quick. Numbers chapter 22. Notice we'll just start here at verse 1. And the children of Israel set forward and pitched in the plains of Moab, on this side Jordan by Jericho. And Balak the son of Zippor saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And Moab was sore afraid of the people because they were many. And Moab was distressed because of the children of Israel. And Moab said unto the elders of Midian, Now shall this company lick up all that are around about us, as the ox licketh up the grass of the field. And Balak the son of Zippor was king of the Moabites at that time. So what we're doing is we see that we've got Balak here. We're introduced to him. Notice here in verse 5, but he sent messengers therefore unto Balaam, the son of Beor, to Pethor, which is by the river of the land of the children of his people, to call him, saying, Behold, there is a people come out from Egypt. Behold, they cover the face of the earth, and they abide over against me. Come now, therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people. Now, again, here you have Balak, who's the king of Moab, and he sends out after this guy Balaam, and he notice what he says he wants you to do. Verse 6, Come now, therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people, for they are too mighty for me. Peradventure I shall prevail, that we may smite them, and that I may drive them out of the land. For I wot that that he whom that thou blessed is blessed, and whom thou cursest is cursed. And the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the rewards of divination in their hand, and they came unto Balaam and spake unto him the words of Balak. So what do we notice here? Balak, the king of Moab, sends out some people to go find Balaam, and the whole purpose of it is to do what? I want you to come here and I want you to curse this people, the nation of Israel. I want you to come and curse this. Notice in verse 7 he says what? And the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with what? The rewards of divination in their hand. What are they doing? I'm going to send these guys out and I'm going to send them money to Balaam. And I say, Balaam, I want you to do this and here's your reward for doing it. Who? Balaam? I don't think so, no. Yeah. No. No. Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. Well, yeah. So give me the 3-second answer. TikTok, who's Balaam? No. Don't do that. By the way, the young man that I'm talking to, that's why he's in a mess, because he's listening to TikTok. Anyway, notice what's going on. He's saying what? I want you to curse him, and here's money for this. Notice that's not only that, but notice he says, and the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the rewards of divination in their hand, and they came to Balaam and spake unto him the words of Balak. And he said unto them, Lodge here this night, and I will bring you word again, as the Lord shall speak unto me. And the princes of Moab abode with Balaam. Now, what's Balaam tell him? Stay here tonight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask God. I'm going to go to pray to God and see what he wants me to do. Notice, and God came unto Balaam and said, What men are these with thee? Again, does God know who these people are? Do they know why he's there? Yes. Verse 10, and Balaam said unto God, Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, hath sent unto me, saying, Behold, there is a people come out of Egypt, which covereth the face of the earth. Come now, curse me them. Peradventure I shall be able to overcome them and drive them out. And God said unto Balaam, Thou shalt not go with them. Thou shalt not curse the people, for they are blessed. And Balaam rose up in the morning and said unto the princes of Balak, Get you into your land, for the Lord refuseth to give me leave to go with you. And the princes of Moab rose up, and they went unto Balak and said, Balaam refuseth to come with us. And Balak sent yet again princes more and more honorable than they. The idea is what? Well, if I send the best people, then he'll listen to me, right? Notice, and they came to Balaam and said to him, Thus saith Balak the son of Zippor, Let nothing, I pray thee, hinder thee from coming unto me. For I will promote thee unto very great honor, and I will do whatsoever thou sayest unto me. Come therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people. What's he doing? I'm going to give you a place in my kingdom. I'm going to give you a position of power. Notice, and Balaam answered and said unto the servants of Balak, If Balak would give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the word of the Lord my God to do less or more. Now therefore I pray you, tarry ye also here this night, that I may know what the Lord will say unto me more. Here's where it gets interesting. And God came unto Balaam at night and said unto him, Notice, if the men come to call thee, rise up and go with them. But yet the word which I shall say unto thee, thou shalt do. And Balaam rose up in the morning and saddled his ass and went to the princes of Moab, and God's anger was kindled. Pause there for a second. Didn't he just do what God told him to? Go with them. What's he do? Saddles his ass and goes. Why is God mad at him? That's not what he said. Notice what he says. Verse 20. And God came unto Balaam at night and said unto him, what's that next word? If the men come to call thee, rise up and go with them. Verse 21. And Balaam rose up in the morning and saddled his ass. Did they come to him? He said, all right, let's go. God gave me permission. Does he follow what God says? No. Well, no. No, because what happens is he rose up in the morning and saddled his ass. He gets up and gets ready and goes, right? And went with the princes of Moab, and God's anger was kindled. Why? Because he went, right? So what's that tell us? He didn't want him to go, and he said, if they come, then go with them. That tells us that they didn't come because God's upset that he went, right? So when you look at that, a lot of people come to that verse and they'll say, well, there's a problem with the Bible because God said you can go, but then he got mad when he went. Well, if you understand what's going on, you read the verse, then you're not going to be upset at that. But notice, and God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the way for an adversary against him. Now he was riding upon his ass, and his 2 servants were with him. And the ass saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand. And the ass turned aside out of the way and went into the field. And Balaam smote the ass to turn her into the way. Now you understand what's going on. Is God intervening in the life of Balaam right now? Absolutely, 100%. Right? Notice, verse 24, but the angel of the Lord stood in the path of the vineyards, a wall being on this side and the wall on that side. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she thrust herself into the wall, under the wall, and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall, and he smote her again. Again, you take a look at this. Balaam should understand what? Something's wrong. But he's what? I'm still going. Notice. And again, you look at this, he just got through saying what? Balak can give me all the silver and gold that he has, but I'm not going to come unless God tells me to. And he's understanding, he's thinking what? Well, I can go now. Notice, and the angel, verse 26, and the angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place where was no way to turn, either to the left hand or to the right hand or to the left. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she fell down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he smote the ass with a staff. And the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, and she said unto Balaam, what have I done unto thee, that thou hast smitten me these 3 times? And Balaam said unto the ass, because thou hast mocked me, I would there were a sword in mine hand, for now would I kill thee. Now stop and think for a second. If you're going down the street and your donkey starts talking to you, you might want to pay attention to some stuff. Instead of saying, boy, I tell you what, if I had a sword, you'd probably say, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be talking, but you're talking to me. And not only are you talking to me, but I'm talking back to you. And you're trying to reason with a donkey. And of course, we understand what God's doing here. He's intervening through this animal to speak to Balaam to tell him, you're not supposed to go. The whole point of the angel showing up is because I don't want you to go. But what's he doing? He's running greedily after this heir. Here's our heir. Here's other people doing the exact same thing, right? Verse 30, and the ass said unto Balaam, Am not I thine ass, upon which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? Was I ever wont to do so unto thee? And he said, Nay. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand, and he bowed down his head and fell flat on his face. And the angel of the Lord said unto him, Wherefore hast thou smitten thine ass these 3 times? Behold, I went out to withstand thee, because thy way is perverse before me. And the ass saw me and turned from me these 3 times. Unless she had turned from me, surely now I also had slain thee and saved her alive. Now, could you imagine that? Angel saying, I would have killed you and left the donkey alive. Now, verse 34, and Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I knew not that thou stoodest in the way against me. Now, therefore, if I displease thee, I will get me back again. And the angel of the Lord said unto Balaam, Go with the men, but only the word that I speak unto thee thou shalt speak. So Balaam went with the princes of Balak. So this time he gets the permission and he goes. But the idea there is what? What's he going to be able to do once he gets there? The only thing he can do is say what God has him to say. And what happens is he gets over there, and what takes place is instead of cursing him, what happens? He ends up blessing him over and over and over again. Notice, go over to chapter 25. Notice chapter 25. Well, let's back up to chapter 24 because I don't want to skip this too. Notice in chapter 24, let's look at this real quick. Verse 9, chapter 24, verse 9. We're still dealing with with Balaam and Balak here. Verse 9, he laid down as a lion and as a great lion. Who shall stir him up? Blessed is he that blesseth thee, and cursed is he that curseth thee. And Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam, and he smote his hands together, and Balak said unto Balaam, I called thee to curse mine enemies. What's he saying? I sent money to you. I sent my best people. I'm paying you to do this job, and what are you doing? You're not doing what I bought you for. That's what he's talking about. Notice, he says, I called thee to curse mine enemies, and behold, thou hast altogether blessed them these 3 times. Therefore now flee thou thy place. I thought to promote thee unto great honor. Below, the Lord hath kept thee back from honor. And Balaam said unto Balak, Spake I not also to thy messengers which thou sentest unto me, saying, If Balak would give me house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the commandment of the Lord to do either good or bad of mine own mind, but what that the Lord saith, that will I speak. And now behold, I go unto my people. Come therefore, and I will advertise thee with what this people shall do to thy people in the latter days. Now doesn't end up being a good thing. But notice this, drop down to chapter 25. After all this, notice what we have here in chapter 25. And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredoms with the daughters of Moab. Now, what did we find out? What did Balak hired Balaam to do what? Curse the nation of Israel. Well, what's he do instead? He can't do anything but bless. But what happens with Israel is what? They end up cursing themselves by falling into this. Notice, he says, and Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab, and they called the people unto the sacrifices of what? Their gods, and the people did eat, and bowed down to their gods, and Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And the Lord said unto Moses, Take all the heads of the people, and hang them up before the Lord against the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may be turned from Israel. And Moses said unto the judges of Israel, Slay ye every one his men that were joined unto Baal Peor. Now, there's a whole other issue here. Drop down to verse 8, and he says, And he went after the men of Israel into the tent, and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. So the plague was stayed with the children of Israel, and those that died in the plague were 20 and 4,000. Now the plague there has to do with that religious rebellion that they're dealing with, of what all they're getting into. And what's God say about the nation of Israel? What did they do? They just fall right in line with all that stuff. Go over to chapter 31. Chapter 31. Notice chapter 31. Here we've got some judgment. Notice in verse 1, And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Avenge the children of Israel of the Midianites. Afterward shalt thou be gathered unto thy people. And Moses spake unto the people, saying, Arm some of yourselves unto the war, and let them go against the Midianites, and avenge the Lord of Midian. And every tribe of 1,000 throughout all the tribes of Israel shall ye send to war. So there were delivered out of the hands of Israel 1,000 of every tribe, 12,000 armed for war. And Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 of every tribe, them and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priests to the war, with the holy instruments and the trumpets to blow in his hand. And they warred against the Midianites, and the Lord commanded Moses, and they slew all the males. And they slew the kings of Midian, beside the rest of them that were slain, namely Evi, and Rekam, and Zur, and Hur, and Reba, 5 kings of Midian. Balaam, also the son of Beor, they slew with the sword. And the children of Israel took all the women of Midian captives, and their little ones, and took the spoil of all their cattle, and all their flocks, and all their goods, and they burnt all their cities wherein they dwelt in all their goodly castles with fire. Notice there, what happens to Balaam here? You take a look at these things, and it's interesting because what happens is when you look at that issue of greedy of filthy lucre, back over there in Jude when he talks about they ran greedily after the error of Balaam. Well, there's a whole bunch of things. What was the main error of Balaam? First issue was what? Did he actually do what God told him to do? No. The main issue there is what? He wasn't faithful to what God actually said, the words that he spoke, because he went even though he shouldn't have. Now, once he got there, what did he do? He spoke the words that he was supposed to speak. But again, you get that issue, but he even told him afterwards, he was like, what? I told you all. If I came in, you give me all the silver and the gold, what's going to happen is I can't do anything other than what God tells me to do. But it's interesting because when he first goes, why does he first go? He's going after all the stuff, right? The money and the prestige and all those things. Go over to there's a bunch of them I want to go to, but there's one that I've lost in my mind. But go over to Matthew chapter 23. One of these days we're going to get over here in Matthew chapter 23. We made mention of something in here earlier, but Matthew chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23. Notice here in verse 13. By the way, Matthew chapter 23 is one of those chapters that you read through and it's scathing, especially if you're in a religious system. Notice here in chapter 13, there's 8 different woes that Christ pronounces or denounces here. Verse 13, but woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. Verse 14, notice this. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer, therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation. Now, what is it that he's dealing with there? He's saying, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer. What is it that they're doing? They're going into these houses where these wives have lost their husbands, and what do you think that they're going to be doing? If you pay me money, I'm going to pray for your dead husband that he might get out of purgatory. You got a whole religious system that's based on that. That's what he's doing. They're going in and they're saying, if you pay us enough, then what is it that they're doing? Are they doing this for filthy lucre's sake? They're running greedily, just like Balaam did. But what they're doing is, are they using religion to get there? They're going to say, we're going to make a prayer, and based on how much you pay us is how long we're going to pray. There's a whole system that still does that today. Hold your place there. Go over to Luke. Go over to Luke chapter 24. Luke chapter 24. Is that one I'm wanting? No, Luke chapter 20. My apologies. Luke chapter 20. Notice what we've got here. Luke chapter 20. Let's jump in here at verse 39. Luke chapter 20, verse 39. Then certain of the scribes answering said, Master, thou hast well said. And after that they durst not ask him any question at all. And he said unto them, How say they that Christ is David's son? And David himself saith in the book of Psalms, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. David therefore calleth him Lord. How is he then his son? Then in the audience of all the people he said unto his disciples, Beware of the scribes, notice, which desire to walk in long robes. Now you pause there for a second. When we first start off in 1 Timothy chapter 3, what is it that Paul talks about there is if a man desireth the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work, right? What do these men desire? Beware of the scribes which desire to walk in long robes and love greetings in the markets. They want to be seen. Now, hold your place there. We're going to come back to that. Go over to Matthew. Hold your place there. Go back over to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6. And notice there's a connection there with that stuff. Matthew chapter 6, verse 1. We're here in the Sermon on the Mount, right? Take heed that ye do not your alms before men to be seen of them. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have what? What are they doing? They're saying, they're sending out trumpets and all this stuff, and they're doing all this stuff, and they're saying what? Look at me, look at what I'm doing. Look at how much I'm giving. And that's what their issue is. Why is it that they're doing it? Here's the purpose, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. Verse 3, But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. Notice this, and when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites. Well, what is it that we just read about in chapter 23 of Matthew? He says what? Woe unto you scribes and Pharisees, what? Hypocrites. He's telling us who he's talking about. Notice, and when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets. Why? That they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou prayest, enter in thy closet. And he goes on down through there. Right? When we're over here in Luke chapter 21, verse 46, what do these guys do? Beware of the scribes which desire to walk in long robes. The first time that we kind of see some of that stuff, you go back to Judges, and the exact verse I'm blanking on right now. But what's interesting is it's the first time you have somebody that pays somebody else to be their father. Interesting, right? When we look at this, he says what? Beware of the scribes which desire to walk in long robes and love greetings in the markets. Walk around like, well, this guy's obviously something's important about him. Look at the long robe. What's interesting is when you go back in the Old Testament, does God give the folks there, the religious leaders, were they to wear robes? They were. But what these guys do is they do what? There's certain width that the band was supposed to be. And what they did is they made that band wider and wider and wider. The collars were bigger and bigger. And the whole idea is what? Look at me. I mean, you look at that stuff and I ran into a former student yesterday, and he was talking about how he was just consecrated into or whatever it was, in the Catholic Church. I was like, all right. Then he's like, there was a kid, I told Delilah about this. There was a kid, he used to come to my class. He used to stay for a couple hours after school every day, and we just talked. He claimed to be an atheist at the beginning. I don't think he never admitted to me, but I do think that he probably did trust the gospel, because I just had him read it every time he came. I was like, read Romans 3:23 through 25. And he'd read it, and he's like, so? And I was like, read it again. So? Read it again. He told me that guy has also been accepted into the Catholic Church, and I'm like, man, the atheist kid. And I'm just sitting there thinking, man, it's just, we look at that stuff, and we look at it, and the rest of the world looks at it, and they say, what do they say about that? That's just, it's garb is what it is, right? You look at that, and we look at that, and we see that. But their idea is what? Well, if I get this band wider, this collar wider, look at what I'm doing. Look how pious they are. Father, how are you doing? You know, just the idea of, they love greetings in the markets. And the higher seats in the synagogues. They're saying, look at my status. Look at where I am. Look at me is what they're doing. And the chief rooms at feasts. We're in the VIP section. It's filthy lucre is what they're getting. Right? Notice. Here's the issue. Verse 47. Which devour widows' houses, and for a what? Here he says what? For a show. Is the prayer the problem? No. What's the purpose of their prayer? It's to be seen. It's a show. Right? Luke 21:47 or 20:47. Which devour widows' houses, and for a show maketh long prayers, the same shall receive greater damnation. Now when we go back over here to Matthew chapter 23, Matthew 23, he says what? And for a pretense make long prayers. The prayer is not the issue, it's what? They're doing the prayer to be seen. And I've been around folks for years, and, you know, they pray, and they pray, and you're like, this thing's got to end eventually, right? And then somebody comes up, and they're like, oh, that was just such a beautiful prayer. They do. It's that repetition, right? And what's interesting is Matthew chapter 6, what Christ says to him, it says what? Don't do prayers of vain repetition. And then what's the most vain repetitioned prayer is that prayer by those folks. Interesting. By the way, it's not that verse, it's a different version of that and they don't even do the whole thing, but it's interesting when you look at that stuff. He says here is what? And for a pretense, make long prayer. It's for a show. And you look at that stuff, and it's one of the things I've kind of noticed over the years. The longer you pray in public, which is something I've wanted to do, is incorporate other folks here instead of me just starting off service, but ask other guys to pray before we start. But what I've noticed is the longer you pray in public, usually it's less time you pray in private. Just something I've noticed over the years, just having conversation with people. But it's that issue of once you get that pat on the back, it's real easy to do what? Well, that was a pretty good prayer. Next time I'll make it longer. And it'll be better, right? Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Nothing's wrong with long prayer, but what's the purpose of it? What's the purpose behind it? If the thing that's motivating you is, look at me, there's a problem. Right? It's the show, it's the pretense. Notice here, 1 Corinthians chapter 11. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. My bad. 2 Corinthians 11. Second Corinthians chapter 11. Let's start here in verse 7. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 7. Have I committed an offense in abasing myself that ye might be exalted because I have preached to you the gospel of God freely? I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. And when I was present with you and wanted, I was chargeable to no man, for that which was lacking to me, the brethren which came from Macedonia supplied, and in all things I have kept myself from being burdensome unto you, and so will I keep myself. You notice there's a slight difference in the way that Paul's dealing with this as far as the money goes. He's saying what? Other people are taking care of me, so I'm not going to be here, even though I know. Notice, he says, I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. You stop and think about that for a second. Completely opposite of that. Notice here, he says in verse 10, as the truth of Christ is in me, no man shall stop me of this boasting in the regions of Achaia. Is he boasting about himself or is he boasting about the people? He's boasting about the people. Wherefore, because I love you not, God knoweth. But what I do, that I will do, that I may cut off occasion from them which desire occasion, that wherein they glory, they may be found even as we. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing that if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. Drop down to verse 20. He says, for ye suffer if a man bring you into bondage, if a man devour you, if a man take of you, if a man exalt himself, if a man smite you on the face. I speak as concerning reproach, as though we had been weak. Howbeit, wheresoever any is bold, I speak foolishly. I am bold also. And then he goes on down talking about those things that he went through. What's he saying there? And the issue there is what? Yeah. Here's the issue. He says, one of the things that he's dealing with there is, if you want to give, you have to give to get. No, it's by grace. Right? And of course, these are the folks right before this. Back up to chapter 9. Back up to chapter 9. This is the passage that brings up, right? 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 1, he says, for as touching the ministering to the saints, it is superfluous for me to write unto you. For I know the forwardness of your mind, for which I boast of you to them at Macedonia, that Achaia was ready a year ago, and your zeal hath provoked very many. Yet have I sent the brethren, lest our boasting of you should be in vain in this behalf, that as I said, ye may be ready. Lest haply if they at Macedonia come with me and find you unprepared, that we say not ye, should be ashamed if is the same in the same confident boasting. Therefore I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren that they would go before unto you and make up beforehand your bounty whereof ye had notice before, that the same might be ready as a matter of bounty and not as of covetousness. But this I say, he that soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly. He which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give. Not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye always having all sufficiency in all things may abound to every good work. As it is written, he hath dispersed abroad, he hath given to the poor, his righteousness remaineth forever. Now he that ministereth seed to the sower, both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed sown, and increase the fruits of your righteousness, being enriched in everything to all bountifulness which causeth through us thanksgiving to God. For the administration of this service not only supplieth the want of the saints, but is abundant also by many thanksgiving unto God. Now, you stop and you think about this. Notice he says, verse 14, and by their prayer for you, talking about the folks there, which long after you for the exceeding grace of God in you. Thanks be unto you for this unspeakable gift. When you look at that in verse 1, he says, for as touching the ministering to the saints, it is superfluous for me to write to you. Why? And that's the issue. So what's interesting is, I was talking to that young man who's wanting to get into music and stuff like that. And he was like, so can I still do the things that I want to if I get saved? And I was like, well, what's going to happen is if you actually understand grace, you won't want to do those things. Grace will motivate you to do the thing that you should do anyway. The answer is yes. So yes. But what's going to happen is, and that's one of those things when you look at this, drop down to chapter 10, verse 13. and it's interesting when you're going through these things. Verse 13, but we will not boast of things without our measure, but according to the measure of the rule which God hath distributed to us, a measure to reach even unto you. For we stretch not ourselves beyond our measure, as though we reached not unto you, for we are come as far as to you also in the preaching of the gospel of Christ, not boasting of things without our measure, that is of our other men's labors, but having hope, when your faith is increased, that we shall be enlarged by you according to your rule, to our rule abundantly, to preach the gospel in the regions beyond you, and not to boast in another man's line of things made ready to our hand, but he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord, for not he that commendeth himself is approved, but whom the Lord commendeth. You notice that in verse 14? We stretch not ourselves beyond our measure. The issue there is ministry can only reach as far as the assembly would allow it to. That's what he's talking to them. That's one of the reasons why I've said, again, guys that I work with at school, they're like, our church is, we went in $25 million of debt so we can redo all the stuff and all that stuff. Your ministry can't go anywhere because now you're held to something. You've not only depleted your funds, but you've gone in debt to prove that look at what we've done. It's no longer long robes, but it's what? Big buildings, light shows. It's a show. Yeah, it's a show. And you look at that stuff, and he says what? For we stretch not ourselves beyond our measure, as though we reach not unto you. For we are come as far to you as also in the preaching of the gospel of Christ. The idea is what? I'm only going to go as much as the assembly will let me, and that's as far as we'll go. We're not going to go farther. We're not going to put anything on ourselves, because then what are you going to be tempted to do? Let's go get some fill. What do I need to do to get the money to get this paid off? And I'll do anything that I need to get that money to get it paid off. It's not you don't give to get, you give because you have. And when a ministry, and of course in the context here, 1 Timothy 3, the issue is what? When the bishop becomes greedy of filthy lucre, what's going to happen is everything should fall apart. And that's usually when it happens. And it's not chasing after those things. So when he says over here in 1 Timothy 3:3, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre. Again, money's not the problem. But we found out last time the love of money is the root of all evil. It's what's the purpose of why you're wanting to gain. Are you wanting to gain to get something, to show that you've got something, or are you trying to gain for the ministry? All right? And that's the issue, and that's the problem there. So our goal is to never follow after not to run greedily after the error of Balaam. That's one of the reasons why we say the book's the issue. And if the book doesn't say it, then we don't say it. If the book says it, we say it. And there's a bunch of other verses we could have gone to, but those are the things I want us to be able to think about is moving forward, how far do we want it to go? and then we give that way. And if we can't go farther, then we don't go farther. If we have to shut the doors, or shut the doors. That's fine. I'm fine with that. Rather not, but because it's really good to have a place that's standing on what God's Word says. And it's really even better to have a group of people that desire that and say, you know what, let's make sure that it sticks around.